Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Evan. Scotty Scheffler went to jail and still made his tee time.
Well, technically he didn't because they moved all the tee times back 2 hours.
Not because of him, though. He went to jail.
Yeah, they moved it because he was in jail.
He went to jail. He fired a 66. Evan.
I went to bed at midnight last night and shot par today at my course.
Dear listener, I want you to know what I'm saying next. And if you're watching on YouTube, based on Brad cracking up, you know I'm not lying. Evan forgot what day of the week it is.
Hey, I'm just vibing on this long weekend.
For legal reasons, I'm not telling you how many beers deep Evan is right now, but I want you to know he quite literally had to rush over from a diaper party with his buddies to make the podcast an hour late. Almost an hour. I'll give you 50 minutes late.
I was here 12 minutes ago.
50 minutes late.
Yeah, it's a long weekend. I'm just vibing.
Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. We love the summer episodes because it's just so off the rails. Believe it or not, the three of us here today are here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to be discussing some trade targets that could potentially be of interest for the Detroit Red Wings. The beauty of off-season content is you can speculate as much as you want, but I think these are, realistic players where Detroit might want to take a look at them, the like of Ehlers or Necas or Lilejegren. We're going to be talking about the expected but exciting news of Nate Danielson going to the Grand Rapids Griffins, and then we'll be discussing our prospect profile for this episode, which is a popular one for Red Wings fans, playing over in Windsor. He's going to have a lot of eyes on him, Liam Greentree. We're going to give you a update across the NHL in terms of the playoffs, which have moved forward, sometimes in dramatic fashion, some other news from the NHL and more before we head into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the Dub Club, you get access to some really great benefits like our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. God knows today's is going to be a doozy. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. Also, you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, this past season and the season before, we gave away 2 tickets to every Red Wings home game, the vast majority going to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to go above and beyond and support the Winged Wheel Podcast. I like doing this because it now means something for the Red Wings. In previous years, when you would talk about trade targets, players who were 27, 28, really productive players, it wouldn't really make sense to talk about it in scope of what the Red Wings would be looking for in the offseason. But now Detroit is in a position where they have to make some moves to try to make sure they don't take too big of a step backwards. If they lose Patrick Kane, if they have to add more youth, which means, less experience on the team, which is a hard thing to do in the NHL, they're going to have to mitigate that somehow if they want to keep playoff ambitions. So, Nikolaj Ehlers. I'll qualify this by saying I've always been a big Nikolaj Ehlers fan. I think he's probably one of the more underrated players in terms of his abilities in the league, just because of the market he plays in. He doesn't get a lot of national attention. Admittedly, he's had, I know, a little bit of trouble with injuries and playing a full 82, but if he's up on the trade block with 1 year left on his deal, are you interested in him?
Yes, but, and I'm going to repeat this all summer, not with 1 year left on the contract. The Red Wings are still not a team that should have any interest in a rental. Okay, there, that disclaimer's out of the way again. So if there's an extension in place, Nikolaj Ehlers does have a lot of what the Red Wings are lacking, namely speed. He plays fast. He is fast. His top speed is fast. His decision-making's fast. He is quite literally the opposite of what everybody on the Red Wings is, save for maybe Dylan Larkin. Now, you got to be careful of, has his reputation run away from his actual production? He's a very productive player, but sometimes he gets talked about like a point per game player. He is not that.
No, he's not.
So if you want someone to come in and solidify the Red Wings' second line, he's probably the best candidate on the market to do that, and hopefully for some years beyond just one. Now, what's the acquisition cost for him? Because we know there's actual value and NHL value. And reputation matters a lot, and Nikolaj Ehlers has a fairly good reputation. So you're probably looking at giving up a first-round pick, a decent roster player at a minimum, or a first-round pick and a really good prospect. Is that what I'm willing to pay for Nikolaj Ehlers? Well, maybe, depending what that next contract is. Mm-hmm. If it's at a reasonable term in AAV, yeah, I'd give up a lot for him. But I don't think that's going to be the case, and I hate to spoil the rest of my opinions for this episode. That theme is going to live with the what is a reasonable price. But he does check a lot of boxes for what the Red Wings need.
Nikolaj Ehlers as a player, actually I should say he played a full 82 games last season, but previous seasons before that, 45 games, 62 games, 47 games, 71 games, 62, and then 82 the 2 years prior. But he is a perennial 20-goal scorer, or 20-goal pace scorer in case he doesn't play a full season. He's good for, anywhere from 50 to 70 point pace in and around there. But if you can constantly be putting up those 20 goals, maybe even 30, depending on your pace that season, obviously being injured hampered that. The speed he plays with, the way he's able to facilitate offense, I really like the way he's the kind of guy who elevates his teammates. Is he the world's best line driver? No, you're right, Brad. He's not, a 100-point player or anything, but he is an exceptional player offensively in the way he reads the game and what he's able to contribute. And I do believe he's an underrated player. It's going to be hard for Detroit to maintain the goal output they had this past season. And if you can add a guy like him, and he's 28 years old, he turned 28 in February, so it's not like he'll be 29 when the season starts. Yeah, I think I agree in that he's someone that I'm willing to pay a lot for. I think that first-round pick is what people are going to think about a lot, 15th overall. And it's not a top 10 pick, but it's still a really good pick. And I think Winnipeg maybe, if they're looking for a top 4 defenseman, which is what's been talked about a lot, that would be tough for Detroit to part with.
What do you mean? We've got a couple top 4 defensemen they can have.
Well,
we have 4 of them. We'll give them all. They all will add up to one of them.
Well, no, one of them very specifically. No, I've said this in the past very lightly, and I just want to. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't necessarily predict it's going to happen, but I do wonder if Jake Walman is kind of in that sweet spot of like a really good player who can play in the top 4 and would actually make sense because he has so much value to him. You don't want to lose Jake Walman. That defense is taking a step back if you lose Jake Walman, but he could be a piece I could see Winnipeg realistically going after as part of a trade. So Detroit has options here. I don't know how much Winnipeg wants to go for prospects who could be top 4 defensemen, because do they want to wait that long? They don't strike me as a team who wants to wait for it to pan out, and you don't get better losing Nikolaj Ehlers, but I think Detroit has some options.
Well, he's the logical piece from Winnipeg when you think of shaking up the core, if that's what they want to do. I think Nikolaj Ehlers would solve some problems for the Red Wings. He's that typical bolt-on 20-plus goal guy that we talk about. He's not going to be the superstar, the guy you notice every single game. But when the season ends, he's going to have 20 to 30 goals, and he's going to have a 15-year career in the NHL. And there's a lot of value to adding guys like that to your team. So, like you guys said, it all comes down to what the asking price is and if you can get a deal done with them.
And it also matters what you think of this draft, too, because Winnipeg's going to be asking for this year's. And I've mentioned before, the Red Wings are probably more inclined to move a 2026 first if they're moving a first, because they would have expectations of improving. And it's all about that certainty versus potential, because, yeah, like Evan said, he's a bolt-on. I was looking at his stats. He's remarkably consistent.
Very, very consistent.
Remarkably consistent. So you know exactly what you're getting from him, and you're just trying to guess when the drop-off's going to hit. Whereas with that 15th overall pick, you're going to be getting a guy 10 years younger and 10 more years of control plus an ELC, but is he going to be that 0.75 points per game guy every year like Nikolaj Ehlers? Now, the way this draft's shaking out, I think there's a fair to decent shot that guy's going to be available at 15. But how confident are you if you are trading that away?
28 is a fine age to be trading for. I believe that. And because of how consistent he was leading up to it, I think he'll actually age pretty well. Like if a guy can figure it out that early in his career, it stands to reason that he can figure out how to keep production up so his age curve isn't so bad. But you're right. It's a balance of, you're getting 5 really good to decent years of him versus what you could get at 15. Statistics say Ehlers is worth that, at least. But, and I'm going to sound like Brad here, what's Detroit's true window? Do you care about the next 2 years? Obviously, everyone cares about the next 2 years. Let's qualify it. But if you're a GM looking long sight, when do I need these guys to provide the most value? Do you care more about this season and next? Or do you care more about the 3 seasons after that? Or maybe you shift that window by a couple of years. So it's not such a simple calculation. You don't want to be bad now and good later. It doesn't work that way. Red Wings fans are experiencing it right now. You have to ramp up. I lean towards I would be willing to move the pick, though. I understand there is a lot of talent in this draft, but it's not to the degree where I think you're going to get for certain a Nikolaj Ehlers or anyone necessarily close with any degree of certainty.
The catch is the contract.
Yes, because 1 year left at $6 million. He can submit a 10-year no trade list, and he's going to cash in. He'll be 29. He's going to be asking for 8 years. He's going to be asking for, and the cap's going to go up again, so you have to think percentage of cap, but he's going to be asking for a raise.
Yeah, if he gets I think I'm undershooting here, but let's say a 7x7, are you giving up 15 for that?
That doesn't really tickle my fancy.
No, it doesn't mine either. That's the thing. And now keep in mind, I know, like every time we have one of these conversations, I can hear the people yelling through their speakers right now. Don't you want to make the playoffs? And yes, but every decision I make, if I'm the GM of an NHL team, is in the interest of winning a Stanley Cup. I don't give a crap about playoffs. Obviously we do, and that's the goal, and you have to get to the playoffs before you get to the cup. But I'm building a team to a cup. And as you alluded to already, what's the Red Wings cup window? I think you probably get 2, maybe 3, in a perfect world, 4 quote-unquote prime years of Nikolaj Ehlers. If you get this 1 year of him and then another 7, and then who knows what he'll be on the back half of that. Probably still useful, but not prime Nikolaj Ehlers. And I understand the risk of what you're getting at 15th overall. Might be nothing. It might be David Pastrnak. Who knows? But I'm taking the risk at higher upside and more cost control. But more importantly, an age bracket where you're getting prime years when the Red Wings should be going for Stanley Cups, not playoffs. So I'm not saying I'm not willing to move a first for Nikolaj Ehlers, but I'm thinking it would have to be a future first with a more reasonable contract. Which, again, we had this conversation with Raymond and Sider. If I'm Nikolaj Ehlers, am I accepting anything that would be considered reasonable at 28 years old on my contract? Absolutely not. This is the biggest contract of my life. I am cashing every last penny I can.
And he really couldn't have timed it better in terms of when these cap increases are coming. Maybe if it was pushed 1 more year, but he is really going to make, in terms of actual dollars, not percentage of cap, but actual dollars, he's going to get a raise here, which is good for him. So you have to remember that this number is going to be, you're going to have to scale it up based on how the cap is increasing. So it's going to seem uglier than it actually is. But I don't know. I think you have to be considering that this contract doesn't necessarily have to be 7 or 8 years. But we've seen what Yzerman's been able to do in the past. Granted, logic dictates that's what he's going to want, but maybe you pay him bigger for shorter term. Not that Detroit has that kind of flexibility necessarily right now. Also, in terms of the trade, you can have money going the other way, right? Like, you can get super complicated with this. I think if Detroit's making a trade, no matter what they're doing, they're going to try to have money going the other way. And then I'm really willing to spend that first round pick plus. Like, okay, you take one of these bad contracts that we have, then you get the first round pick, and then you get, a good roster player now, or that premium prospect, or whatever it might be. And then, we get Ehlers and we get to shed the cap. It's a big move, and, you're asking a lot of Winnipeg. And as always, if you're ever doing trade projections, whatever team you're in favor of, I guarantee you're biasing the trade in their favor. We do the same too. It's you have to feel uncomfortable for it to actually be objectively a neutral trade.
No, 100%. If you're not uncomfortable with a trade, then the other team is never in a million years going to accept it. That's the reality of the NHL. But I'm going to use this as a transition here because I need to make this point in regards to Nikolaj Ehlers. If you like Nikolaj Ehlers, which I do, and you are willing to spend a premium on Nikolaj Ehlers, which most people should, why would you not get Nikolaj Ehlers 3 years younger?
Martin Necas?
Because if Martin Necas is on the block, that makes a lot more sense. Very similar players, very similar production, but 25 versus 28 years old. RFA for Necas, not RFA at the end of his contract for Nikolaj Ehlers.
Disappointing year for him in terms of what we thought and the Carolina Hurricanes thought he would be.
Good buying low.
Yeah.
Still over 50 points.
Yeah, still over 50 points. 77 games, 24 goals, 29 assists for 53 points. So, I mean, that's the point has been made elsewhere, but it's not a lot more than other players that people think are not good producers for the Red Wings. So if you're going to be comparing him to, Kopcomp or whoever else, and you want him to be your second line center, he's not going to go blow the roof off the place. But I will say he has the potential, based on what our expectations were for him earlier, that he could still emerge and do a little bit more. So Necas is, I think, a good, you're right, Brad, to draw that bridge. Because if you are paying that premium, then spend a little bit more, get him, and then you could have some untapped potential. I really like that.
Yeah, a bit of a down year, and I'm only going to say a bit of a down year this year. And the 3 years before that, again, remarkably consistent with almost a little bit better production for Ehlers, but at a younger age. Now I understand the contract status and the age means you're going to pay more for Necas. But if we think Ehlers can hang on till something close to his prime till he's like 31, 32 years old, cool. That would be almost the entirety of Necas's next contract.
Yeah.
So is Necas going to cost more? Yes, probably by an uncomfortable amount. But I think that's a way better bet, a way better investment. And Carolina could be the team that's making a lot of sweeping changes this offseason. So who knows what they want in return. But I have a hard time looking at Ehlers and going, yes, I want that, and not just going, well, this makes more sense.
I'd be happy with either.
Yeah.
Let's just go to the high-end forward market and pick whichever one we want off the shelf, and whatever one's on deeper sale. We're talking about this like it's automatic, but genuinely, if I was a Red Wings fan who is looking at these trades, I have a hard time saying no to either one of them if you can make it work.
Yeah, where I kind of get iffy about it is at that 15th pick for this year, because I think the unique circumstances around this draft means a very, very good forward that could be about the caliber of an Ehlers or a Necas is available there just to have for free versus trading a ransom for a little more certainty. And I understand certainty in the NHL is worth a lot, so I'm not dismissing that. But you have to take risks on contracts, on draft picks, on trades in order to be a top-end team, and you have to hit on some of them. And where is that best avenue, and when is the best time to utilize any one of those options coming out of a rebuild? And I still think the Red Wings are in the phase where their targets right now, primary targets, should be 25 and under, just because of the timeline. And I understand people are sick of hearing that, but the team missed the playoffs this year. I know how close they got. But if you think a team that missed the playoffs is winning a Stanley Cup in 3 years, I got real bad news for you.
Statistically very unlikely.
Especially a team that doesn't have a first overall pick or a generational superstar. Like, it's just the reality of the situation. So would you want to bank on a 21-year-old player that you pick 15th overall, a 28-year-old Martin Necas, or a 31-year-old Nikolaj Ehlers as you're entering what could be your Stanley Cup window? And ultimately, that would be the biggest driving force behind any decision I'm making as a GM right now.
So for the sake of it, because I think all three of us have a habit of pronouncing his name a different way each time, hoping we hit the bullseye once, Necas.
He's wrong.
We'll have to have him on the episode, on the podcast then.
Yeah, let's have Marty Necas on the podcast. But yeah.
Who?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
It's actually Martine. Get it right.
He does, the answering the question, the future question is a bonus here. And Carolina's not stupid, right? Like, they know they're really good at scouting. They're good at their pro scouting. They understand how to value their players, and they've gotten a lot of stuff right in terms of future projections. So you're not going to get the guy cheap. But I do agree with you, Brad. It's not like black and white, one good, one bad. But if you had to pay a premium, I'm more comfortable with Necas for the pure question of he answers a problem in the future. But I would still be happy with Ehlers. I know you said you're factoring in certainty, but I think I'm really, really, really big on that certainty. Like, knowing how a 15th overall pick is going to turn out. Like, yeah, ideally that 15th overall pick joins the Red Wings when he's 20, 21 years old and ramps up and becomes a good player and, has a 12, 13, 14-year career with the team. That's well and good, but it's statistically not in their favor. And it's not like you're buying a middle six player. Like, you're not redoing the Cop thing here. You're not redoing Comfer here. And, not necessarily good or bad that acquisition, but you're getting a high-end forward. So I still really like the Ehlers option. And if one of these teams is providing an avenue to ship money back, that's, to me, as much of a deal breaker, or a needle mover, I should say.
You are aware we're talking about Winnipeg and Carolina, right?
Yeah, it's the offseason. We can get a little crazy.
Those don't strike me as two organizations that are going to be eager to eat money to facilitate a trade.
No. But, hey, if Carolina's going to make these big sweeping changes everywhere other than their coaching staff, maybe. Speaking of a team making big sweeping changes, the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is a player that's not going to be popular, and I don't think necessarily solves a long-term problem for the Red Wings at second pair right D, but Timothy Lilejegren, if he's available, and he was underwhelming for the Leafs, he wasn't what they wanted him to be. It's not like he was god-awful, but they got him and they were hoping that he could be a real answer for them in their top four. Sometimes maybe, most of the time not, but if Detroit's looking for a solution to play right D to some degree, do I think he's the best one out there? No, I don't think he's the best, but I do think he could be. You could do a lot worse than him, flipping between second and third pair right D for the Red Wings. I like Lilejegren in a depth role, and you mentioned this pre-show, Brad. If you're trying to bring in Axel Sandin Pellikka, well, then he can kind of be a stopgap. And if Sandin Pellikka succeeds and moves up the Red Wings depth chart and eventually is their second pair right D, and then Lilejegren moves down, could that be a potential solution down the road?
Well, first of all, I love how this episode is, and when we get into our prospect profile, it's going to come up again, how we're relitigating the entire 2017 draft.
I know, slowly over time, we are doing that.
But as a guy who was picked in the teens in the 2017 draft, I think you could do a lot worse than Lilejegren. He'd be, the fifth best defenseman on the Red Wings today?
Mm-hmm.
He was not terribly far off, a half a point per game this past season, and people called him underwhelming this year, and I understand that was more so because of the defensive side of the game. But he would play the role that Axel Sandin Pellikka would eventually play for Detroit. So if you wanted to set it up for that natural transition, a 25-year-old near half a point per game right shot defenseman, probably a pretty good place to start. I don't think Toronto lets him go cheap, but I think Toronto is ready for a lot of change. If you want to get really weird, package him up with Mitch Marner. Let's just swap organizations here. But there's a natural fit there, and I wouldn't hate it. I don't think I'm giving up anything more than even a second-round pick. Probably feels optimistic if you're a Leafs fan right now, but that's probably the realistic ask.
Yeah, same as Necas and RFA, but you're going to have to pay him. It won't cost a lot.
Yeah, the contract won't be bad, but the Leafs aren't exactly giving him away.
Right shot defensemen are at a premium in the league. Like, we were talking about Tanev before the show, and I was saying, man, if you want a guy who can come in and play for Detroit as a stopgap for the next generation to come up, he is like the ideal solution, but he is going to command so much money because he is still so good at defense and he shoots right. So,
give me Chaos Giraffe.
Coming around on him, man.
He's had a good playoffs. I'm coming around.
We're going to do free agents in a future episode in terms of targets, so not necessarily today, but I initially brought it up as a, hey, this is coming, right? A little bit joking, but we're coming around on him. Lilejegren, we're bringing him up because his name was in the news and he's apparently on the market. To me, he's not the same kind of excitement of adding him as Ehlers or Necas. It's like he is a dart at the dartboard. You're not throwing from too far away, but he's not guaranteed to be anything different than what Detroit has brought in previously. Like, he could falter in Detroit. If he was underwhelming in Toronto, as much as we make fun of Toronto, who's to say he's going to defend well enough where he's not going to drive us insane in Detroit? But untapped potential, 25 years old, maybe he could be a solution here for a little bit.
The old saying of you need 300 games as a defenseman before you really truly know what a defenseman is. He's 25, but he hasn't even played 200 yet because of all the roster issues Toronto has had. And yeah, he's not a perfect player, but I think in another organization where he had a bit more of a chance, we might be looking at a different player here. And again, there's risk attached to it. I understand that. I know that. Would I prefer to take a flyer on a 25-year-old, maybe okay defenseman versus going out and signing another 33-year-old defenseman for 5 years at $4 million? Yeah, please, I'll give up the second-round pick 100 out of 100 times in that scenario. But you have to understand what might happen if you do that.
Does the Red Wings locker room have bunk beds? Where would Timothy Lilejegren fit in the lineup with the log jam of defensemen that they have?
Well, the Leafs would need a right-handed defenseman.
My God.
So we might have one or two of them we could trade back. I'm just throwing it out there. Like, maybe there's someone that they have some familiarity with who they'd like.
This isn't even the first time Justin Holl has been brought up for Toronto since coming to Detroit.
Because we can't just return him because we lost the receipt, I guess. But
we'll take store credit.
Which is basically Lilejegren.
These trade proposals always feel so silly, but in the interest of the Red Wings, like looking down the barrel of, is Kane leaving? How do we stay playoff relevant? Like, these are the kinds of conversations that Steve Yzerman's having with other GMs and, his management staff and his pro scouting staff is, what's the solution here to keep us relevant? Because as much as, we sit here and talk about the Red Wings window long term, because ultimately what we're interested in is Detroit becoming a perennial playoff team. We still want the Red Wings to make the playoffs. It's exciting. We had a ton of fun this past season, more fun than we've had in a long, long time in this podcast.
Outside of those 2 months we won't speak of.
Right. But more than that, this organization wants playoff hockey. They want playoff hockey for the revenue. They want playoff hockey for the season ticket deposits. They want playoff hockey so the fan base doesn't grow tired of them. Missing the playoffs, losing for this long, is cancer to a team. It is poisonous, business-wise especially. So agree or disagree, it is a fundamental priority for this organization.
I think it is. I don't even think this is a hot take. It shouldn't be.
I disagree.
Because we have seen dozens upon dozens of examples of, in the history of the NHL, of teams making moves to just get to the playoffs. And long term, it's almost always bad. When you are
like the Red Wings?
Yeah. When your goal is 7th in your conference, you are going to get stuck around 7th in your conference forever, and eventually the problems pile up. That's what Andrew Kopp was. That's what JT Compher was. That's what Ben Sherratt was. That's what all these contracts were. We need to just get there. We need to get a little bit better. But then if you make too many moves in the interest of getting a little bit better, you don't get a lot better. And I understand that this sucks and it's been out of the playoffs forever, but it is super, super important to remember, because you hear the 8, 9, 10 years, almost a decade, whatever, however people are phrasing it since they've made the playoffs. You have to almost chuck out the first 3 or 4 years of those, because love the guy, but Ken Holland made so many bad decisions in the interest of keeping that playoff streak alive, and then made so many bad decisions in the draft. This organization did not progress at all until you can draw a line from when Yzerman got here. So yes, we haven't made the playoffs since 2016 or whatever it was. But this rebuild really, truly, and honestly started in 2019.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting here going, oh my God, it's taking so long to turn around. Yeah. Because we basically had to throw 5 years in the garbage.
You're not wrong. But I think something that we tend to do as a fan base is draw this like bifurcation and say it's either one of these things or the other. I think you can still make moves to progressively get a little bit better where you're mortgaging a little bit of future or using a little bit more cap space than is most efficient. Detroit hasn't done well on this front. I will concede that. Without giving up all of your future and all of your future cap flexibility. And the difference between what Ken Holland did and potentially making some moves now, bringing in players who are already, past 27 years old, is that Detroit has a prospect pool and a slate of picks that has them set up really well for the future. Do they have a Nathan McKinnon in there? Do they have a Cale Makar in there? Do they have a Leon Draisaitl in there? No, but by and large, they do have a good foundation where you're not going to get rid of all of that in a potential trade.
I'm glad you brought that up because this is a point that I've meant to make for a while and just it never has naturally come up in conversation. There are ways to structure for the future while still keeping an eye on the playoffs in the short term. If you go back to last summer, what was probably the most impactful move made to get the Red Wings as close to the playoffs as they did this year in terms of players acquired, not counting Patrick Kane midseason?
Alex DeBrincat.
Yes, but is that a short-term move or also a long-term move?
That's a long-term move.
Great, that had two effects. Now let's look at short-term moves for the playoffs this year. What was the best move they made that helped them get as close to the playoffs as they did this year?
Patrick Kane.
Not counting Patrick Kane.
Oh, mid-season. Still not Patrick Kane.
Because midseason, yeah. Here, I'll give you a hint.
Oh, Shane Gostisbehere.
1 year deal.
Yeah.
The moves, and the point I'm trying to make on that is 1 and 2 year moves to help in the short term are fantastic because it keeps flexibility. It doesn't create a logjam, and you can get incrementally better. Where the Red Wings are killing themselves, and I beat this to death, is those 4 5 year deals to middling 28, 29, 30-year-old players. Yeah, sure, Sherratt had a decent year, and that was a good stopgap. Still got 2 years left at too much money. Comfer, hopefully he doesn't regress. He had a good year, but he's not helping the Stanley Cup window. Kopp has been a disaster. Contract-wise, he's still a usable player. Holl, disaster. Like, these are what holds you back when you're at this point. Whereas you can find the 2 years of David Perron, the 1 year of Shane Gostisbehere, the 1 year of Daniel Sprong, and still have an eye to the future. Now, what I'm getting to the point in regards to the trade conversation is you can get Lilejegren short term. Makes a ton of sense. You can get Necas long term, and that makes sense for what your window is going to be. Are you going to pay a premium to get Nikolaj Ehlers to get you to the playoffs for him to regress when you're trying to win a Stanley Cup? Again, it's the giving up a premium to do it. If you could drop Nikolaj Ehlers on the Red Wings right now with a 6x6 contract or something similar,
yeah,
great.
Yeah,
nobody in the right mind is going to say no to that. Because even as he regresses, he's probably still going to be usable. But are you paying a premium for that is where I kind of get this is where Yzerman has to be careful in the trade market, because we do need players like Nikolaj Ehlers, and they are likely not coming from the draft. They are likely not coming from the system based on what they have at forward in the system already. But you have to be picky with who you go for, because if all these 30-year-old $4, $5, $6, $7 million contracts start adding up, you are the Minnesota Wild for the next 20 years before you know it.
So what you just described to me is that lane where you can have both things. You're efficient in your contract signings, so the signings that you said made sense and fewer of the bad ones. and, bringing in guys who answer a couple of questions. And then that, to me, gives you flexibility for a unicorn scenario where you can get a really good player and the contract isn't painful. So you're willing to eat the fact that you're signing him through age 36 or whatever it would be hypothetically with Ehlers. One thing I'll add, and this is a devil's advocate thing, is there are some who think, and I guarantee you some in the organization who think, that the value isn't just when are they at their best. It's also if you pluck Ehlers and drop him into this team now, he is adding value by, playing with your young players, showing them how to play. He's adding value by getting butts in seats now. He's helping the team win, which will help Dylan Larkin get to the playoffs, which will help him progress as a player. They see all these small, capillaries, these avenues for progression that aren't so visible or the first thing that fans think of when they evaluate trades, but there is value in bringing in a really, really good player. Think about Patrick Kane and the value he brought to the team outside of the insane success he had offensively. A lot of Lucas Raymond's progression this season, Lucas Raymond will tell you, is from being around Patrick Kane. I think that is valuable to a degree. Enough to justify this, taking these big leaps time after time after time, that's a hard sell for me, but I'm just saying I think a lot of people do think that way.
No, you're right. Most of the NHL thinks that way. And that's why most of the NHL is not perennial cup contenders.
Yep.
That's the sad reality of it.
Well, that conversation is going to keep happening all offseason, but it's fun to happen now. Nikolaj Ehlers, Martin Necas, Timothy Lilejegren are just some of the first names to come up on the trade market. And in a year where
and soon Mitch Marner.
Yeah, in a year where a lot of players on a lot of teams are going to be subject to big shakeups as, cores kind of get given up on. I think this could be a trade market where will a lot happen? No, it's the NHL. It's almost never that fun, but a lot could happen, and that actually is notable. Okay, one more Red Wings note here, and this is one that we discussed, for weeks now leading up, but unfortunately the Portland Winterhawks, their season is over in the WHL. They lost in the finals, which means Nate Danielson, his time in the WHL is over. He is now eligible to play for the Grand Rapids Griffins and has been reassigned to the Grand Rapids Griffins as they continue their Calder Cup run in those playoffs in the AHL. So Nate Danielson, how huge is that for Red Wings fans?
How cool is it to think Nate Danielson's going to win 2 trophies with the name Calder in it in a year?
That's in 12 months. Yeah, that's going to be very.
He's going to get one year, and then he's going to get the other the next year.
Obviously, you feel for him, and if it would have been cool to go see him play in the Memorial Cup in Saginaw, but this is best case scenario for me. He gets a long, long run in the WHL, and now you're able to see him hopefully help the Griffins on a long playoff run. And we've said time and time again in previous episodes, he looked great with the Red Wings in his camp and preseason. On a worse Red Wings team, he would have been a no-brainer to make it out of camp. And if Detroit hadn't made other signings, he could have made this team and I think not looked out of place. He has an opportunity here. You said this last episode, Brad. This is his audition to basically say, yeah, I'm favored for a spot on the Red Wings next season, not necessarily the Griffins. It could be a short stint. He could not get a lot of ice time. It's hard for the kid to jump over to the AHL and jump in and be excellent right away. This is just a little mini audition. Don't get it wrong. But it is an opportunity.
He did also just finish a whole ass playoffs.
Yes.
4 rounds.
And it's the same in juniors as it is in the NHL. When you play that deep, you are playing through injury and exhaustion and soreness. So goodness knows what he's dealing with, but this is a no-lose for Danielson and the Red Wings in my mind.
Well, if Evan made it here tonight, I think Danielson can make it.
Yeah, what is he complaining about?
You had a tough life. What were you drinking today?
Labatt Blue.
That's the right answer.
And that's it. Any other drinks I saw there, I smacked out of people's hands.
Yeah, Labatt Blues and Labatt Blue Lights.
Exactly.
What are realistic expectations for Nate Danielson?
If he can play a regular role and put up some points, I think that's a huge win. Because again, he just went through a whole playoffs, and it's not like he's walking into a November AHL game. This is second round of the playoffs. Intensity is going to be ratcheted up to 1,000. Error margin is going to be nil. He's walking into his toughest test of his hockey career by a mile right after playing 4 rounds of playoffs. So I don't think he's going to walk in here and be a point per game guy and blow the roof off the building. If he can hang and contribute a little bit, I'm happy.
If he just looks not out of place, I think you have a whole summer of getting very excited for Nate Danielson as a prospect potentially on the Red Wings next season.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. Even if he doesn't produce at all, like, I don't think people need to throw up any red flags and be like, oh my gosh, are we giving Nate Danielson too much ice time or too many games of hockey in this season? I think this is just another sort of test to see where he's at, to get him acclimated with the pro game and get him a little bit closer to the Red Wings organization.
Okay, that is Red Wings trade targets for Steve Yzerman. That is Nate Danielson. We are going to be back with more after the break, but first we want to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. And we're back. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice Evan has made a critical game time decision at the halftime to either power through or succumb to the nap. So he's been replenished with another Labatt Blue Light as he keeps. Are you just going back to the party after you're done the episode?
Apparently it's raining outside, and it is my shot in croquet right now, so we are delaying the game significantly right now.
Hell yeah.
That is the most Evan thing you possibly could have said.
There's a rain delay in the croquet match.
So we're not going to cruise past croquet match here.
No. I just don't know that we have the time today to dive into Evan's croquet match.
I always have time for Evan's croquet match.
Before we do that, though, let's do prospects. And this is a prospect that people have been talking about a lot this year for good reason, because he produced and he played really close to the LCA, just over the border in Windsor for the Spitfires. Liam Greentree, right winger for the Spits, and, you know, captain material and a big guy who produces, and has been compared to a player that might bring up draft pains of old. He's a complicated prospect, but one that's in play. Who is Liam Greentree, and where do you follow him?
Greentree, that's a name of someone who sounds like they'd be playing croquet right now.
It actually very much does, yeah.
Greentree's going to be a very divisive prospect going into this. Played on a terrible Windsor team, but was their captain at 17 years old, which is not nothing. Huge numbers over, I think he actually hit exactly 90 points in 60-something games. Was a go-to player for that team. High skill player, very high skill. Big forward, 6'2", but plays slow and doesn't have a ton of foot speed, which is a archetype of a million prospects we've heard about in the past, all come with the obvious risk of, is that pace and speed going to translate up levels? Like I said, he dummied the OHL this year, but was that because he was one of the very few guys on Windsor this year who could put the puck in the net, so he got a lot of ice time? His teammates deferred to him a lot because he isn't having a great U18 right now, and he did not have a great Hlinka in the summer. So the questions are valid. Now, what is the ultimate upside? Because we had these same conversations about Kirby Dach, about Michael Rasmussen, about a million other players, and you know, for every success story in a Quentin Byfield, you have a miss in a Michael Rasmussen. So where does Greentree fall in this? And he's had questions about his compete level, but as we've seen with different forwards of this build, is that just because of the size they make it look easy, or is there a genuine compete question there because, for every Patrick Laine, there's a Tage Thompson where they look the same, but you can guarantee the effort level is different. And I think he's going to be intriguing. I think anybody who's listened to this podcast long enough knows this is the exact type of prospect that I get really
You're horrified of this.
This is my biggest risk
Yeah.
factor type of prospect because there's traditionally in the first round, we've seen more misses than hits. But that doesn't mean the hits haven't been there and they haven't been big when they have hit. So how much you like to gamble?
The difference for me between him and we'll use Rasmussen because we're familiar, but he's not the only one who's kind of fallen into that gamble zone. So it's not a knock only on Rasmussen. This is an archetype of risk with the big draft pick. But the difference to me is one, he's not dominating because he's 6'6". I think he has an NHL-sized body, like 6'2 plus, and playing at 200 pounds plus, and he plays a strong game. That's an NHL body, but it's not like he's 6'6", just beating up on guys because he's taller and can reach around them. Like he's doing the right things that he would have to do in the NHL as well. I also do see higher end skill, puck creativity, thinking offensively than we saw with Rasmussen. I don't think he's a particularly dynamic player to an exceptional degree that maybe other players could be in that pick 15 range, but there is still more there than other guys who are just big and get a lot of points and you ignore all the in between.
The Michael Rasmussen model of tipping everything in and smashing in rebounds because nobody could get him away from the crease in junior.
Which, those goals count in the NHL, but it doesn't always translate up, right?
They do, but we haven't seen them. Sorry, I hate picking on Rasmussen because he actually is a good player, but not what we hoped he'd be when we drafted him 9th overall. Greentree's assist numbers intrigue me because the brain is there. I do like his hockey IQ. I do like his ability to process what's going on around him. And like you said, he doesn't get pigeonholed into scoring a ton because he's stronger than everybody around him, which is a huge, huge plus when you're talking about the risk factors with this type of player. Rasmussen, as good as he was in junior, that guy was the exact opposite of a playmaker.
Yep.
That is not an issue with Greentree. My entire, and I do mean my entire concern around him is speed and pace. Is when the game speeds up, is he going to be able to keep up? And I'm not sure he will.
Something that I've said before is that I don't necessarily think that speed and high-end skating is as necessary for a productive prospect as much as maybe it's been made out to be in the past. I know the game is getting faster and higher skilled and things like that, but you don't necessarily need that to be successful. I will say it helps, and in the case of tiebreakers, I will look at it. So I have the same concerns.
It's probably worth mentioning because, again, we've had so many similar conversations in years past that I feel like we probably do need to clarify every year when we have a prospect like this. Speed and pace are not the same thing. Pace does not mean how fast is he getting up the ice. It's how quickly is he making decisions? How quickly is he able to, make a snap play? And, you can be standing still and make 3 really quick plays on one power play because you're able to read what's happening around you. Speed is skating. When he goes from point A to B right now, does it inspire you with a lot of confidence? No, it does not. And is he playing at his slower pace in the OHL because he's able to utilize his size and he knows that if he gets pressured, he's not super concerned about it? Or is he slowing it down because he's just utilizing the time he knows he has? And that's a big distinction. And I think that's the biggest distinction of whatever side of that argument you fall on is what you think he's going to do in the NHL.
Yeah, it's super interesting with him because, like you guys said, he's not a good linear north-south skater. He doesn't, for a guy who is 198 pounds, you'd think he'd be an absolute mutant. He doesn't generate a lot of power in his strides, but he is able to elude pressure. And is that because he's 6'2" and 198 pounds in the OHL? That would need to be dissected very closely to see if he can translate up a level. His shot is definitely pretty strong. Like, he's got a very quick release, which you need to have in the NHL. You cannot load up every single shot and pick your corner. It's got to be quick.
Timu Pulkkinen would like to know your location.
Yeah, I'm looking for his too because it's not in the NHL.
Oh, jeez. Poor guy. It's the summer.
So many guys are catching strays this episode.
Who else
only
are we
one of
taking
us
on
is loaded.
tour? Yeah, not me.
No, yeah, that's right.
So, where do I don't know where I really draw the line on Liam Greentree. I think more needs to be discussed about him. And that's what leads me, I think, to not taking him at 15 is because we've already talked about other guys that I think have less risk and just as much upside as he might have.
The more dynamic elements that exist in other players' specific facets of their games to me is what moves other players up. But I will say when I look at Liam Greentree, the fascination of, and I sound a little bit like that, well, it doesn't work for anyone else, but it just might work for us, screen capture from Arrested Development. But the payoff, if he is the big guy, strong forward who actually turns into a top 6 power forward, even though that's the power forward of old is dead, that payoff is huge, no pun intended. So it's kind of a fascination, and there are indicators there to me where it's not like a guaranteed you should be scared of this guy and he's going to be a dud in the NHL. No, I think he actually could be a good top 6 forward. And if you can get a player of his archetype, that's hard to predict when they're going to translate, and it's hard to capture. So he's in the list of guys who I would be happy with the Red Wings drafting. Where he is, it's going to depend on 2 things. One is how the board falls, and 2, other guys who I would prefer over him if they're still there, and there are at least a few.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be flipping tables if the Red Wings picked him. There's enough there that would intrigue me at 15, and I don't think I'm going to have him ranked that far away from 15, but I can say pretty confidently there's 15 guys in this draft that I like better than him.
Yeah.
So will he be my preferred pick at 15? No, probably not. Because again, I can just rattle off 15 guys going, I just like this player more. But I don't think he's super far behind the guys that I have at like 13, 14, 15.
Liam Greentree has a lot of fans, but I know a lot of people are also already out on him. So I'm curious to see how other scouting groups evaluate him. And as you know, the consensus rankings from scouts, for example, that what Bob McKenzie puts out, I want to see where he falls in there. But that's Liam Greentree, an option for the Red Wings. Okay, let's jump into NHL news. The Stanley Cup playoffs are moving forward. The East is come down to what are, I think everyone would agree, the 2 best teams in the East, especially right now, the Florida Panthers and the New York Rangers. Let's start with Florida. I know Boston fans have their complaints about goalie interference versus not, and penalties versus not, and Bennett and Marchand and things like that. Shout out to Brad Marchand, and I don't say that a lot. I don't even say the words shout out to Brad a lot on this podcast. But Brad Marchand, when talking about the Bennett thing, said, you have to call out the specific fact that guys are out here, and if you can hurt the other team's good players, and I'm paraphrasing here, you're going to do that. That's what happens in the NHL playoffs. And people don't like to admit that, but that is a thing.
People are clutching their pearls.
Yes, it is a thing. And that's not justifying what Bennett did at all. It's just calling out the truth.
We're all thinking it.
Yes.
Like, we're all thinking it, right? And he's just the guy saying it.
Whenever a player's injured and people are like, oh, no one targets injuries. Are you kidding me? I saw an entire team of players take 2-hand chops to Leon Draisaitl's ankles. Yes, they target their injuries.
I loved Marchand's answer. He's like, what, you want me to be mad at him? I do the same thing, and so does everybody else. What do you want?
Anyhow, the Florida Panthers, they staved off Boston with, again, another late goal. How many times have we seen late goals, especially in clinching games, move the needle here, which we're going to talk about in a second, but Florida moves forward, and they are a force, man.
Yeah, they're the best team in the East on paper and in practicality so far this year. So it's not surprising that they, well, not ran through Boston, but 6 games, like they earned that win. Although before we go on, one really crazy stat I heard, I think if Vancouver wins, this will be the first time in over 3 decades, the Final Four will be 4 division winners.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. That's almost hard to believe.
It's insane. If you want to talk about hockey being the most random sport, there it is. It's nuts. I think you have to, the stat I saw, you had to go back to the 70s or 80s the last time it happened.
That was only 10 years ago, though.
That's right. It was only We just saw the anniversary of Steve Yzerman's winner against St. Louis, the Gretzky had it, lost it thing. And yeah, that was not too long ago. Oh man.
We're lucky Evan can't do math.
My hips are tight.
You're lucky I can't do math.
Moving on, the New York Rangers and the Carolina Hurricanes. Man, I actually thought, and a lot of people did think that Carolina was going to do this. Going into the third period, up 3-1 in Game 6, they were down 3-0 in a series that very well could have been 2-2, or they even could have been leading. And then Chris Kreider scores a natural hat trick in the third period. The Rangers end up winning the game. They put off Carolina, sending it back to Game 7. This series felt like Carolina dragged Freddie Andersen to a point where they just needed him to make simple saves, and he couldn't even do that. Goaltending failed them.
Yeah, the first Kreider goal was exceptionally bad. Don't think there was much he could have done on the next two, but we talked about it all year. Great team, but can they get a save when it matters? Not that Freddie Andersen was bad, is bad, or will continue to be bad, but they just never got the key save. Any year, any playoff, they always got average goaltending, and it bit them. And Chris Kreider, man, if the Rangers win the Cup, that's the type of shit that they'll build a statue of you for.
That guy is a gamer in the playoffs.
It's crazy to think the Rangers have won one Cup since 1940.
If Boston are the Rats and Florida is now taking that crown, I think Carolina is now taking the pretender crown.
They're the new San Jose. They have to be. They're getting there.
They are going to have to break through. They have all the makings of a team who, with the right goalie and the right year, can break through. Because let's not take anything away from New York. It's not just Kreider. Shesterkin, after having a rough start to the season where people are like, oh, is he going to have a bad year and is New York screwed? No, he looks like Shesterkin. He made huge saves in the third period and all playoffs. That team looks good. They have questions about 5-on-5. I know they're going to have to answer those if they want to beat Florida, but they are one of the two best teams in the East.
Gary Bettman's got to be such a huge Rangers fan right now. One, that's the best market imaginable to win a Stanley Cup. So having the Rangers deep in the playoffs is always a good thing. Two,
he would prefer Toronto, but yeah.
Well, we got to talk about teams that can actually win in the playoffs.
That's right.
So, and outside of Jacob Trouba, like the Rangers are just an exceptionally likable team. Like Fox, Zibanejad, Panarin, like the comeback story of Alexis Lafreniere this year, Shesterkin. Like this is a team you want to root for. Like a lot of reasons to love them outside of their captain. And arguably the greatest Stanley Cup finals in our lifetime, the 94 Rangers Canucks, could have a rematch.
That would be hysterical.
That would be
unbelievable. They have to have Mark
unbelievable.
Messier at every game possible. And if it's in Vancouver, he is going to need armed security.
Yeah, well, right now we have the Pavel Bure like tribute tour going on in the playoffs. Vancouver, Florida, and the Rangers.
Oh man,
Carolina. I'm happy for you guys that you think Carolina is good.
They are a good team,
San
though.
Jose. They're the San Jose Sharks.
Okay, they're a couple overtime results away from this series still going on right now.
Yeah, and that's great for them. Like, Ryan, you can't keep dragging me back in. I said when they got Jake Guentzel, I'm like, maybe this is their year. I dragged myself back in.
That's right. That was on you.
Hurt. I hurt myself again. I'm no longer buying on the Carolina Hurricanes.
You want some honest Evan takes where he's not afraid. You want non-fensitive Evan. Just get him well lubricated for the show.
Yeah, a couple more Labatt's.
Picture this, though. When we have this same conversation next year and you're going, the Carolina Hurricanes, but with UC Saros.
When that happens, we can talk about buying some more stock. But for now, I'm out.
It's Groundhog Day, man. That's just going to be the next thing to get you back on the wagon.
I know. It will happen again.
Dallas, Colorado. Dallas won in double overtime in Game 6 to win. I think they actually won previous to that in overtime, and that goal should not have been called back.
Holy shit. Like, I understand how subjective goalie interference is and, like, the 50-50 calls that probably are really close to 50-50 that we can all throw our arms up about. Or when you go back to the guide and it's objectively correct, I'm sorry. You throw a player into your goalie, that goal should stand 100 out of 100 times. That's the worst one we've seen in these playoffs.
That one, and we saw the Boston one against Florida like that. But that one was unanimously, you see people are like, no, Dallas won that game before. I'm very happy that Dallas ended up winning that game eventually because that would have been terrible.
I didn't stay up to watch that game, so I caught it I don't look at my phone first thing in the morning, so I was watching the
you
morning.
Think you're better than me?
Yes. So
you can do that?
So I was watching the morning highlights, and that was my first anything with that game. And then I saw the highlight of that goal, and then I saw the ref wave it off, and then they kept showing highlights. I was just like, oh no.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is going to be the most insufferable conversation of the year. Please let the next highlight be a Dallas goal. And then they showed a Dallas save, so the Colorado player was coming down. I'm like, no. Because thank God.
If Colorado won that game, then they're winning the series, and then they're winning the conference finals, and then they're winning the cup. And everyone's going to talk about that forever.
And you would have known that Colorado, if they win that game, and you're right, they would have won Game 7, you could have heard the entire city of Buffalo.
Yes.
How does it feel, bitch?
100%. 100%. It would be Colorado and Buffalo against the world. The last series here, and I said this before we hit record, but you have the President's Trophy winner or the team with arguably two of the greatest players on the planet right now, first being Connor McDavid, and wherever you want to rank Leon Draisaitl, and the way he elevates his game in the playoffs, you have a hard time not selling me that he's not at least second right now. Those are the two teams who could make the conference final against Dallas. And between Dallas, Florida, the Rangers, and X team being Vancouver or Edmonton is probably the fourth favorite to win the cup. That's how good these conference finals are on both sides. And that's how big the questions are in net for both of these teams. Shilovs has done a fine job standing in as their third goalie. It's not his fault. Demko doesn't look like he's returning anytime soon. And Edmonton had to flip back from Pickard to Skinner, who won a game, but can he keep doing it? Statistics say it was a pretty tough sell before. They're going to Game 7. Whoever wins this is going to have a massive following behind them. Obviously, there's so much energy behind both fan bases, but how are you going to pick them as a favorite over Dallas?
Well, you don't have to.
You don't.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah, I agree.
Dallas is the favorite probably to win the cup right now.
In my bracket, I think they are.
I
Same.
picked them to win the cup, but Florida and New York look scary. But Vancouver and Edmonton, what's going to happen in this series going to Game 7 Monday night?
Someone's going to be insufferable at the end of that game.
Everybody will be.
Between Canucks fans and Oilers fans, you don't say.
Is it wrong if I don't care if McDavid loses?
No, I'm a big, I like to see the best players play for as long as possible, guy, as long as they're not on, a Chicago or a Toronto or whatever. But I know that's not everyone's cup of tea.
I think just the way Edmonton's built, I would prefer if they didn't, because I don't like that they can just outgame everyone because they've got two of the best players in the world and their team construction sucks.
And it does.
That's just how I feel about that.
They're a bad team buoyed by two superstars. But here's the thing. I don't know. You guys can read into this whatever you want. 1997 playoffs. Rangers take out the Panthers. Oilers upset the Stars. Red Wings win back-to-back cups. I don't know how that translates here, but
legally we have to abide by that.
Yeah, we don't do a lot of math on this show, but that math is math.
We have to follow the path to see what happens. So we need Vancouver to just step aside for this one because it's for science.
I retract my statement. You can edit all that out.
We'll see where that goes, but these conference finals are going to be juicy one way or the other. Speaking of Edmonton, there's not a lot to this, but Ken Holland's name is floating out there. He's not going to be the guy in Edmonton after this. It's been talked about retirement. That was my understanding, that Ken Holland is going to be retiring, but apparently Columbus in their search, his name has been linked to them. I don't know what substance there is to that, but that's just that's how crazy the whole coaching GM world is right now.
I will say, as someone who likes Ken Holland as a person, and who's a fan of a team in the Eastern Conference, I fully support him coming back and running an Eastern Conference team.
Agree. That's what the Columbus Blue Jackets need. Craig Berube hired by Toronto as head coach.
Shocking.
Yeah, they were always going to go in the direction of a Craig Berube type, and he was the most Craig Berube guy to exist on the market. So
those guys are going to love Craig Berube.
I actually think he could do good. Like I said this before when I talked about this being the most likely outcome a few weeks back or whenever they moved on from Kiefer, we thought they were going to. He can get a room in line. Is he the kind of guy with an expiry date? I don't know. You don't know how he's going to interact with that team. That team's construction should change over the next couple of years pretty significantly. But I don't hate this move at all. St. Louis fans loved him. He brought them a cup, so that's why, but they loved him.
Also, Nylander and Matthews have long-term contracts right now, so it doesn't matter if he pisses them off a little bit. They can't go anywhere.
Yeah. Rod Brind'Amour extended in Carolina, rumored for 5 years with the same coaching staff, which Carolina fans are a little conflicted about. Obviously would have been the most desirable coach on the market if he walked, but Hurricanes fans are wondering, are special teams and a lot of other things fall off in the playoffs, so why that part?
Goaltending. It all comes back to goaltending for Carolina. They were right there with all the best teams, but they couldn't get a save, and they don't have the superstars at the top of their lineup like their peers do.
There's been noise going around about Rod Brind'Amour of like, oh, he's not, moved past this phase in the playoffs, and what has he actually accomplished? And he's all hype because he's obviously a very prominent coach. And I think there's truth to that. Like, you're only as good as what your accomplishments say you are in the NHL. But I agree with you, Brett. I think, a few saves and all of a sudden his reputation is way different.
We've seen bad coaches with excellent teams find success and they get a long career. We've seen good coaches on bad teams have short careers and find no success. So I think if you just strip away what team they're coaching, I think Rod is an excellent communicator. He's obviously well respected in the NHL, and it's really a no-brainer to bring him back. And there's obviously that is a strong reason why every team was starting to line up if Carolina was about to fumble this.
And then in Philadelphia, rumors of Matvei Michkov coming over to Philadelphia sooner than expected, which is just a huge testament to you never know how things are going to shake out with Russian contracts. Even if they say the ink is dry and it's ironclad, if the player can buy out the contract, if there's a clause in there, if it's not exactly the most historically above the board and consistent league that's been run across a few names over time, things can move around. Is it always going to be in your favor if you have a Russian prospect over there? You're thinking about Dmitry Pechelnikov? Not necessarily, but Matvei Michkov is a massive name to come over to North America. So if that actually transpires, huge for the Flyers.
He's a Calder favorite now this year, yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
There's no way he didn't game his draft interviews, right?
Well, that's the rumors. He was telling different teams different things. It seemed like he very much wanted to go to Philly, and he did what he had to do to make it happen.
And fair enough.
Yeah, hey, by all means, if you have the ability to make that happen for yourself, you might as well. What this does vindicate us on is all that time, the whole summer we sat there smashing the table going, if he's there at 9, take him.
Yeah. Yes.
Didn't get there, but
came close. Closer than we expected. And then before we jump into overtime here, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the heartbreaking passing of Darren Dutchyshen after a long battle with prostate cancer, just 57 years old. A lot of people grew up with his voice and face talking over sports highlight packages and what he did for SportsCenter and hockey fans and sports fans. Certain, people who you grew up watching on TV or celebrities or commentators, like they hit you harder than others. And that one sent a chill through me. He was just such a massive, massive person in terms of, the hockey world and just bringing the commentary and recapping what happened the night before, and had such an amazing reputation in the industry for good reason. Just by and large, an outstanding guy in every way, and it's just heartbreaking that he is gone so soon. Like, just a lot of people have memories of him, basically narrating their mornings or their evenings and through the night of those, recapping what happened in the world of hockey, and it's a big loss for the hockey community.
Yeah, it's been a particularly jarring month. Since I was 8, 9 years old, I've had the same routine every morning. I wake up, go downstairs, make breakfast, sit down, turn on SportsCenter. I've been doing that for almost literally 30 years now. And Dutchy was that guy for the majority of it. And then, you get home from work or you get home from school and turn on SportsCenter for some background noise. For a lot of that time, there's Dutchy. And again, Bob Cole. Like, the voices of my almost literal childhood and teenage years are gone a month apart from each other. It sucks.
Yeah. So condolences to the family and friends of Darren Dutchyshen. Massive loss. That void will be never replaced. Okay. We are going to take this opportunity to jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. Proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast. If you want to support the show, again, benefits the overtime bonus episodes, the Discord, the giveaways. You allow us to do things like produce this show throughout the off season, make it bigger and better. You allow us to produce Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashanth Iyer and Sean Shapiro, who had Jake Walman on the show last episode. A phenomenal interview with Jake Walman. Unsurprisingly, Prashanth and Sean knocked it out of the park as usual. Please go listen to that and give them a follow. You also allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation and a lot more. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast. Joseph Barry says, with all of these potential players available, do you guys think pick 15 is in play now? I think from hearing the episode, you'll know this, and I'll say it already. I think it always has been in play.
It has been, it will be, but given the team needs and the rumors of how the draft's going to go, I think the value on it has increased.
Yeah, I agree. Moving on, Wizard of Osgood says, how important do you think it is for all of these guys developing in Grand Rapids to have a deep playoff run? And if Cossa carries them to a Calder Cup, what does that do to his timeline in Detroit?
Well, what do you classify as a deep playoff run for a very young Griffins team? They're in the second round. I would say mission accomplished. You hope they win and keep going, but 2 playoff rounds for a bunch of early 20-somethings, that's going to do a lot for them.
What does it do if Cossa, achieves all that? It will inspire a little bit more confidence, relatively speaking, that he could do a very difficult thing, which is make the Red Wings and, hold his spot. But as a goalie, that is extremely hard. There are very few things that could change my mind on this. Even if he makes the Red Wings, if he were to hang around for 82 games, backing up, that would be a remarkable accomplishment. It is hard for young goalies to stick in the NHL. That's just the nature of the game. And as goaltending gets worse in the NHL, save percentages going down, it's an even harder task for them. Young goalies, on average, at NHL level, suck. You do not want to shatter their confidence. All Motor No Hand says, have you guys heard any substantial updates regarding any of our free agents or possibly contract negotiations? Cheers, boys. There's, stuff is ongoing as always, but in terms of, is it at a fever pitch right now? No, there's not a lot of big movement or signs that things are at a, significant impasse or about to be completed. Not to say that can't change on a dime. It's just not where the conversation's going right now. Hemi Howard says, is there merit in thinking we could trade down in round 1 as a way to offload a contract or two similar to Datsuk to Arizona? Looking at Chicago at 20 and the Ducks at 24, would taking, say, Holl or Fabry with 15 to clear approximately 7.5 mil and dropping down 5 to 9 spots be worth missing out on any chance at Yzerman and Catton? And yes, it takes 2 to tango. That would be a colossal return to clear that much cap space.
And it depends how the board falls, because you referenced a good example of that, and that turned Jacob Chychrun into Dennis Cholowski. So call me hesitant.
I think if you can do it, it's not bad. I'm going to take the obvious name, and people are going to want to kill me for repeating it, but he's just the poster boy for this right now. If there's a Wyatt Johnston on the board and you actually like him as a draft team, you don't pass over someone with that much upside. But if you think your guy's going to be there later and you're going to take him anyways, then yeah, it's a no-brainer. Offloading contracts is going to be one of the hardest but most necessary things the Red Wings are going to have to do this offseason. So to me, yeah, you absolutely consider it. One last one here from Wings fan in St. Louis. Scott says, I'm good with any trade as long as it doesn't involve a head case like Pierre-Luc Dubois, for example. Even if Lalonde could push all the right buttons to get him playing effectively and producing, I think it would be a bad idea to introduce that psychological dynamic into the Red Wings locker room. He is easily the hardest contract in the league to trade right now, right?
Oh, God, it's got to be. He was terrible this year. $8 million plus for what, 7 more years? Good God.
Yeah, you were talking about buying him out, which is insane.
He was on the 4th line towards the end of the year.
Yes, he was bad. Easily the most untradeable player. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast and jump into our Patreon exclusive overtime. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. I want to thank all of our listeners, new and old. Welcome to the show. And if you've been with us for a while, thanks for hanging in there and hope you're enjoying our off-season content. We'd like to thank Labatt Blue Light for sponsoring not just this episode, but Evan's afternoon and evening. We also want to make sure that we thank all of our Patreon supporters. We could not do this without you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. And if Patreon's not for you, but you still want to support us, give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, give a thumbs up on YouTube, and hit subscribe wherever you are. It makes a big difference. Tell a friend about the show. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Samuel Soderholm, Aikfer, Icon, Victor Zetterberg, Ryan, Brad, I'm Swallowing Hannah, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Avery Sloppy Seconds, Beep, Carl Bertanen Aluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose, Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Marcus, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pudd, S. Klein, brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Dub Club. Scott Martin, Skeletor, Screen Lube, Stoley 70, Wingnut. That's what I appreciate about you. Utah Stormin' Mormons, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Yzerplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AB, Adam Rose, All Motor, No Hands, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Brad Simmons, Chi-Town Wings fan, Chimkum Nuggets, Chuck Buff Chest, Charpless Goon, Commander Ben Baron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Chimkin Nuggets, so that name kills me every time. Brand new name level supporter. Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsuk's Dirty Deke, Eric Nance, Evans Fourth Putt, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Known Petrie Truther the Mexinadian, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy in Avs Country, Ophelia, Red Wing Tar Heel, Reed, Salt Lake Sugar Girly, Sean Mason, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott. This episode is sponsored by Twisters, Tom Yzerplan Respecter, Throw the Road Puss, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We're going to go see how Evan does in his croquet match.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.